Saturdays in autumn are synonymous with college football. Each time the pads are laced up, the potential for greatness exists. The game's emotions can make us cheer and at the same time can make us cry. It's why we watch the game. In 1890, Dr. William Rainey Harper was elected the first president of the University of Chicago. 15 years later, at the age of 47, Harper lay dying of cancer, but wanted nothing more than to beat arch-rival Michigan on Thanksgiving Day in 1905.
He was so bedridden that he had to stay at home and not go to the game. They put a magnified electronic telephone line under his pillow so that he could listen to the game.
In order to win, Chicago had to upset the most dominant team in college football history. Between 1901 and 1905, Fielding Yost's point-a-minute Michigan teams compiled a record of 55-0-1, outscoring their opponents an amazing 2,821 to 40. By the end of the 1905 season, they were undefeated and had not been scored upon all season.
Yost ruled with an iron hand and bragged of his lovely, wonderful machine. Told them not to think, just to be part of the machine, and they would win.
Yost rhymes with boast, and that's what he liked to do. When he won, he wasn't a quiet man. He would revel in the attention.
Before Yost's arrival at Ann Arbor, Michigan and Chicago had played 8 times, with each team winning 4. But between 1901 and 1904, Yost Wolverines defeated Chicago 4 consecutive times. However, in 1905, Amos Alonzo Stagg's Chicago Maroons, led by All-American quarterback Walter Eckersall, entered the game against Michigan 9-0.
In the previous summer at a track meet, Yost and Stagg got into a fight, and Yost yelled at the top of his lungs, "We'll give you plenty come Thanksgiving Day next year." And Stagg was embarrassed.
More than 27,000 fans packed Chicago's Marshall Field on a cold, snowy afternoon to witness the titanic struggle between the nation's 2 best teams.
Scalping was at a premium. The students at the University of Chicago were getting upwards of $20 a ticket that they paid 25 cents for. In the dormitories and the buildings surrounding Marshall Field, bleachers would go up on the roofs and people were hanging out the windows.
Armed with a vendetta and a dying president, Stagg inspired the troops.
Just before the kickoff, Stagg related that story about how Yost berated him, saying, "We'll give you plenty." And he told his players, "Please don't let this man cram this game down my throat."
Surprisingly, the entire first half was an offensive struggle for both teams, and there were 22 combined punts in the half. Back at home, Chicago's president couldn't hide his emotions as the teams went to the half scoreless.
Harper got so excited during the first half that his wife had to take the sound system from under his pillow and relate the news to him rather than letting him get overly excited.
There's a rumor that at halftime, Harper had sent a note to Stagg and the boys in the locker room saying, "You have to win this for your dying president." So there was a huge clamor for Chicago to win that game.
However, things appeared bleak for the Maroons in the third quarter.
Ike Garrels kicked the ball all the way back to the Chicago 15. A subsequent penalty pushed the ball back to the 8, which in Yost's scheme of field position had him in the catbird seat. He was licking his chops.
Chicago's All-American responded to the challenge.
Eckersall called a quick punt. He took the snap and he faked the punt. As the Michigan guys came in, he ran around the right and he picked up 14 yards. And that was enough of a buffer that he inspired the Chicago Maroons, and they marched into Michigan territory.
Stagg called it the most daring play he'd ever seen in a championship game. But Chicago's drive stalled, and they were forced to punt the ball back to the Wolverines.
Walter Eckersall hefted a long punt that was taken in on the goal line by the Michigan halfback, Dennison Clark. And Denny Clark, for the first time since he had played for Fielding Yost, thought for himself. He decided that instead of letting it go, he would catch it and run it out and maybe be a hero.
He crossed into the field, which means he can't down the ball anymore. And he got tackled and driven back, and then two Chicago men clobbered him in the end zone.
At first, there was absolute silence in the stands because the referee had not signaled. And then all of a sudden, the referee raised his hand, and there was absolute pandemonium.
Unfortunately, at that time, if you hit a man in front of the goal line and your tackle carried him behind the goal line, that counted.
Chicago had won. Their narrow 2-0 victory gave them the Western Conference Championship, and the Wolverines their first loss in 57 games. Stagg finally had his revenge, quieting the boastful Yost. A parade of nearly 2,500 students and alumni, led by the school's band, marched to the dying president's house and sang the alma mater. It was President Harper's final game. 2 months later, he was gone.
In the dressing room after the game, Denny Clark said several times, his head in his hands, "Oh, I shall kill myself, I'm in disgrace." Well, no one took that seriously. Fielding Yost, years later in the 1920s, said that he had seen young Denny Clark, and Denny was still moaning about what he had done. Yost told the boy to get on with his life.
In 1932, Dennis Clark put a gun to his chest and shot himself in the heart, tragically killing himself. In the suicide note, it said that he had hoped that his final play would be of some atonement for his blunder on Marshall Field.
College football had never seen anything like it. They were brash. They were confident. They were cocky. The Miami Hurricanes brought a swagger to college football that had never been seen before. It was a reflection of their head coach, Jimmy Johnson.
We got 75,000. There's one in every seat. And they came here to see Hurricane football. Offense, defense, the kicking game. Let's go like a bunch of crazy men and play some games.
Our guys had that kind of a confidence. They had that kind of feeling that we're going to go out there and we're going to dominate the game.
In the 1980s, Miami entered a series of battles with Notre Dame in a heated but brief rivalry.
Well, in 1985, in Jerry Faust's last game, of course, Notre Dame traveled down to the Orange Bowl and just got pummeled by Miami, 58-7. Notre Dame fans will tell you they feel Jimmy Johnson ran the score up. They feel he just pushed Notre Dame's face in the dirt and just rubbed it in and rubbed it in and rubbed it in.
Lou Holtz replaced Faust in 1986, and when the series with Miami resumed in 87, Notre Dame was ranked number 10 in the nation. The Hurricanes were undefeated and ranked number 2. Again, Miami crushed the Irish 24-0 en route to the national championship. The following season, the Canes were once again led by quarterback Steve Walsh, who had won all 19 of his starts as the Miami signal caller. They were both undefeated, and Miami was ranked number 1 in the country.
There was no game that I can ever recall at Notre Dame Stadium where the animosity for the other team was so high and the intensity amongst the Notre Dame fans was so immense.
This was the famous game where T-shirts were printed, Catholics versus convicts. You can't spell scum without UM. Can you read this poster? The Miami players can't.
It all exploded before the game.
They line up for their stretch right at the tunnel, right where you come out. And so they're right there in your way. And next thing you know, there's a bunch of pushing and shoving. Well, with our players, With the attitude of our guys, they weren't going to be intimidated by anybody.
You know, guys are getting kicked, guys are getting elbows, guys are getting drilled up against the walls of the tunnel. Both teams go back into their locker room, and the Notre Dame players are going nuts. And Holtz comes in, and Holtz says, I want you to focus on this game. I want you to play football. But if there's a fight, save Jimmy Johnson for me. It was a moment of genius, because the Notre Dame players went nuts again.
Holtz's motivation worked.
And here Notre Dame leading Miami, but early. Here comes the blitz. They pick it up. Walsh's pass is deflected and intercepted. Terrell will go the distance.
But Steve Walsh, as he did many times in the past, guided the Canes back.
Walsh pulls it out. Has protection. There it is. Cleveland Gary for the touchdown. Miami does it again. Just what they do best of all.
The game went to the half deadlocked at 21. However, the momentum swung back to the Irish in the third quarter.
Touchdown, Notre Dame.
They recaptured the lead 31-21. But the Canes stormed back again.
In the fourth quarter, the whole game was played on Notre Dame's half of the field. Steve Walsh was just destroying Notre Dame's defense. It was almost as if Miami was playing hockey and they had a power play for 15 minutes.
After cutting the lead to 31-24, Miami faced a 4th and 7 at the Notre Dame 11, with a little over 7 minutes remaining in the game. Jimmy Johnson decided to go for it. What ensued was the game's most controversial play.
Puts it down. Notre Dame pounces on the loose ball. Walsh is quickly there. Was he called down? Notre Dame ball. They have fumbled at the 1-yard line. Jimmy Johnson furious.
He puts the ball down and the ball comes out. I don't see how they call that a fumble.
He's over the middle. It looks like he's going in. Ball's on the ground. He's spinning. It's still, to this day, it's hotly debatable.
Miami turned the ball over 7 times. Miami was either going to turn the ball over or they were going to score. They punted 1 time in the entire game.
Remarkably, Miami got another shot. Facing a 3rd and long, Tony Rice was hit and fumbled the ball.
Miami's ball inside the 15-yard line.
For Walsh and the Canes, the game came down to one final 4th down play.
Something. Touchdown, Andre Brown.
Now they'll go for 2, I believe.
There was no doubt that Jimmy Johnson was going for 2. This was Miami. They don't go for ties at Miami.
Incomplete.
After the Irish recovered the onside kick, they knelt on the ball and the game was over. Notre Dame 31, Miami 30.
This game was won by the Notre Dame spirit. You owe it to the student body, to everybody who's been here at Notre Dame. It's the spirit that did it.
It was one of the most glorious victories in Notre Dame history, and it sent a message to all of college football. You know, we're the bullies again, and they didn't lose again the rest of the year.
Notre Dame finished the season 12-0 for the first time in school history. The 34-21 victory in the Fiesta Bowl over West Virginia gave them their first national title since 1977. However, the 1988 season will always be remembered for that thrilling game played in South Bend on October 15th.
That was a game that any Notre Dame fan in America can recite to you chapter and verse. It was the day that Notre Dame woke up the echoes again.
Army, through various recruiting devices through the Second World War, had gotten the very best football players.
Doc Blanchard, Mr. Inside, and Glenn Davis, Mr. Outside. Together, the two running backs led Army to back-to-back national championships in 1944 and 1945, averaging over 50 points a game. In 1944, the Cadets handed Notre Dame their worst defeat ever, 59-0, and then the following season blanked them again, 48-0.
Notre Dame got taken apart during World War II because almost all of its star players were overseas in the service. And then in '46, all these guys come back to Notre Dame. It's no longer guys who nobody's ever heard of. Now Lujak's back at quarterback. They wanted payback against Army for those two huge losses the previous two seasons.
No one wanted revenge more than Notre Dame coach Frank Leahy, who had led the Irish to the national championship in 1943 before he went on to active service. Leahy wanted to restore Notre Dame's stature as the nation's greatest program.
Leahy was extremely suspicious, and the week before that game, he thought there were planes flying over their practices trying to steal their plays. He was just a basket case going into that game.
It's the football battle of the century, and 74,000 fans spin the turnstiles to jam every seat in Yankee Stadium. Those coveted Army Notre Dame Ducats are the password today, and football fans are on edge everywhere.
The game was billed as an offensive showdown, both teams averaging over 30 points per game. Army coach Earl Blake's squad was ranked number 1, winners of 25 games in a row. Notre Dame was ranked number 2 and was also undefeated. On paper, the game was a toss-up. Both Army and Notre Dame came out tentatively. In the second quarter, Notre Dame went on an 85-yard march and threatened to score. Faced with 4th and 2 from the Army 4, Leahy had a crucial decision.
It was Notre Dame's chance to go ahead 3-0, but they didn't kick a field goal. And that went back to Leahy's, hard-nosed philosophy about football. Notre Dame didn't kick field goals. Notre Dame was too tough to kick field goals.
The decision backfired. Running back Bill Gompers was hauled down 1 yard short of the first down. Despite the offensive weapons on both sides, to everyone's surprise, the game took on the complexion of a sparring match. Neither team took any chances.
If either team would have scored in the first quarter, then we'd have opened up and really had a nice ball game. Both Leahy and Coach Earl Blake played a very, very defensive game. It was 3 yards in a cloud of dust.
Still scoreless in the third quarter, Notre Dame drove into Army territory. But the Cadets' Arnold Tucker picked off a Lujak pass and brought it back to the Army 41. It was one of his 3 interceptions on the day. The turnover seemed to give them momentum, and on the very next play, Blanchard finally found some daylight.
Doc Blanchard, closely covered all day, finally shakes loose around end. He's clear except for one man, Lujak, who doesn't miss.
Lujak just stretched out like this, running as fast as he could, stretched out like this, and just hit one of Blanchard's legs. Blanchard had been that much further ahead of him. He would have gone 40 or 50 yards for a touchdown.
It was the defensive play of the game for Notre Dame. Players, of course, played both ways in those days. And because of Frank Leahy's conservative approach in this particular game, Lujak never had a chance to make his mark as an offensive player. But he will be remembered for that great defensive play that he made.
In the fourth quarter, defense continued to dominate. Both teams were only able to muster 1 first down apiece. The offensive fireworks that everyone expected never went off. The game ended in a scoreless tie.
Notre Dame was fortunate to come out of it with a tie. One of their fullbacks told me that had Leahy stayed home that day, Notre Dame probably would have beat Army. But the game was a big disappointment for a lot of people. The game of the century turns out 0-0. Who expected that?
6 years later, I'm in the Notre Dame locker room, and Leahy's coaching, and Leahy's changing his clothes and getting ready to go on the field. And he's talking. Leahy talked a lot to himself, thinking about things. Well, anyway, that particular day, he said, should have gone for the field goal. 6 years later, he's thinking, that's still in his mind.
The tie ended Army's 25-game winning streak, but kept them ahead of the Irish in the polls. Notre Dame rolled to victories in their final 3 games. And because Army struggled to beat Navy, the Irish leapfrogged the Cadets to capture the national championship. Army would never again finish number 1. In 1968, Ohio State won the national championship. The following season, they were overwhelming favorites to repeat. But ABC television executive Roone Arledge didn't think so. Instead, Arledge gambled on the two Southwest Conference powerhouses, Texas and Arkansas, who he believed would be number 1 and number 2. He moved their annual October game date to a more exciting end-of-the-season date, December 6th. 2 weeks before Texas and Arkansas were scheduled to play, Ohio State met conference rival Michigan.
There it is, what has to be the upset of the century.
What happens? One of the big upsets in the history of college football. Michigan 24, Ohio State 12.
We were ranked number 1 after Michigan had beaten Ohio State, and Arkansas was ranked number 2. ABC looked smarter than a tree full of owls.
The stage was now set. Texas, with their vaunted wishbone attack, had the top-ranked offense in the nation. The Razorbacks were atop the nation in scoring defense, allowing less than 1 touchdown per game. The game had so much anticipation. President Richard Nixon was in attendance to present the national championship to the winner. Hours earlier on the bus ride to the game, Royal called his quarterback to the front of the bus.
Coach Royal said, James, if we get in a 2-point situation where we need to go for 2 points, this is the play we want to run. I said, oh, Coach, we're not going to need a 2-point play. And he said, this is the play, you understand this is the play we're going to run. If we're getting a 2-point, I mean, he was all business about it.
Although it's been raining for hours, it is not at the moment. The fans here are such rabid football fans that the weather doesn't bother them at all.
The night before the game, there was a huge storm, and an icy fog hovered over Fayetteville, Arkansas. Despite the poor weather, the partisan crowd immediately warmed up. The Razorbacks capitalized on an early Longhorn mistake.
A loose ball, and Arkansas has recovered.
Right off the bat, they fumbled. I think it was the second play of the game. They fumbled, and we took the ball in and scored.
Second and goal, and Arkansas leads. Bill Burnett.
Burnett's touchdown was the only score of the first half. Texas returned to the locker room scoreless for the first time all season. Their high-powered option attack had been limited to just 102 yards rushing in the first half.
As I look at this game in the first half, I think that Texas has enormous power that is really not unleashed yet. I think they're going to have to throw more to open up the Arkansas defense. I think under those circumstances, they're likely to score once or twice.
But it was Arkansas's offense that struck first.
Here are the Razorbacks with 9 minutes and 14 seconds left in the third quarter. Montgomery.
Dykes, touchdowns.
Arkansas took a 14-0 lead into the fourth quarter and were now 15 minutes away from capturing their first national championship.
In the huddle, several of the guys were getting nervous in that people were saying, we got to get it, we got to score here. I can't say I wasn't scared, but I always thought we'd win the ball game.
We were not moving the ball well. We called a pass. James Street goes back to throw.
2nd and 9 for Texas. Start of the fourth quarter. Jimmy Street in trouble. Gets away. There he goes. And Texas is on the scoreboard.
This was a situation Royal had anticipated. Now he would call the 2-point play that he and Street had earlier discussed.
I can't tell you how important it was to me as a quarterback to know exactly the 2-point play, because when he called it during the game, there was no panic.
And Street has just made 8 points for the nation's #1 team.
Arkansas responded to Texas's challenge on the ensuing possession.
They take the ball very steadily all the way back down the field. I think that's the only time in the game that I was concerned that we might lose the game, because I was afraid of a field goal puts us in a position where we got to score twice, and I didn't know if we had time to score twice.
The Razorbacks then made their first crucial mistake of the game.
And Texas gets an interception. What an interception. Danny Lester, number 23.
Texas moved the ball to their own 43-yard line and faced a 4th and 3 with 4:47 left to play.
I go to the sideline, and I wanted to run the similar play to the one we scored the 2 points on. I felt like I could plant my foot and cut up in there for 3 yards. Everyone was talking at the same time. They're just yapping at each other, talking and agreeing or disagreeing. Coach Royal takes his headset off and looks at me and says, right 53 veer pass.
I had decided to go for it all. I just felt like it's time to gamble.
I turned around and go back, and I said, are you sure? And he said, hell yeah, I'm sure. When I get in the huddle, the first thing I say is, you're not going to believe this play, but it'll work.
Longhorns at their own 43 and a half. And going to throw to Randy Peschel, and Peschel catches the ball. What a toss, Randy Peschel.
It was a perfect throw. Our defensive back and our safety man were 2 inches away from deflecting the ball.
James Strait throws a ball as far as he can, and it drops like a mortar down the chimney of the ship.
If Darrell Royal would do the same thing again, I doubt that you could complete that more than once in 1,000.
I get chills today thinking about that. The ability to make that call in that situation.
2 plays later, the Horns had 1st and goal at the Arkansas 2.
Touchdown, Longhorns.
Jim Bertelson's touchdown drew Texas even. The important extra point awaited.
This is a big one. It's up. Good. So there it is. Jubilant Longhorns from Austin, Texas.
I can remember the feeling of coming off the field and all of our players going crazy, everyone going nuts.
That's dejection, Chris.
Raising their hands, number 1, hook 'em horns.
For a team to be behind 14-0 and then not to lose its cool and to go on to win, that proves you deserve to be number 1, and that's what you are.
Rue Knowledge's gamble had paid off. Half of America's viewing audience that afternoon was tuned into the game. The Longhorns finished the season 11-0, finishing with a dramatic come-from-behind 21-17 victory over Notre Dame in the Cotton Bowl, capturing the unanimous national championship. On a chilly November afternoon in 1966, a Connecticut priest rescheduled his Saturday confessions so his parishioners could watch the Notre Dame-Michigan State game on television. Both teams rolled into the game undefeated, ranked number 1 and number 2 in the nation. And both teams were hungry to win their first national title in nearly 15 years.
When the week of the game came, there was a press conference every day after every practice.
I remember Monday evening around 6 o'clock. I had about 5,000 kids came to my window, and they were yelling, "Kill Bubba, kill." Every day, it got bigger.
Notre Dame took a train to East Lansing for this game, and while the team was still in Indiana, there were people at the platforms, the various train stops, with signs saying, "Go Irish." As soon as the train crossed the border into Michigan, now the signs began to say, "The Irish."
The Irish quickly realized that they were no longer under the protective confines of the Golden Dome.
Getting off the train, Nick Eddy was behind me. He slipped and fell and hit his shoulder against the iron railing, and that put him out of the game.
Notre Dame's offensive trio of running back Nick Eddy, quarterback Terry Hanratty, and end Jim Seymour was reduced to a duo and faced an imposing Michigan State defense, led by 6'7", 290-pound Bubba Smith.
Martin Stadium in East Lansing, Michigan, where undefeated Notre Dame meets undefeated Michigan State.
It's going to be a dandy, head-knocking football game, we're sure of that. The number 1 team.
If Eddie's injury wasn't enough, things would get worse for the Irish on the 3rd series of the game. A miscommunicated play call had Hanratty, Notre Dame's quarterback, call his own number.
I took my 4 or 5 steps back and started up front, and I just saw a sea of green. And I said, this isn't going to be good. So I just put my head down, and someone hit me and spun me around, and all of a sudden I looked, and here comes Bubba.
I was running full speed. And when he came out of it, he was on one leg and standing like this with the ball. I said, oh, baby, you mine.
As a result of the collision, Hanratty separated his shoulder.
So I come off the field, hold my shoulder, and Eric says, what the hell did you call that draw for? I said, you called it. They brought it in the huddle. He said, no, I called a halfback draw. I'm going, oh, man, I get hurt. Someone confused the play coming in like that. So I went out and, Coley O'Brien came in.
O'Brien was fed orange juice and candy bars throughout the game just to cope with a recently detected diabetic condition.
The game plan basically, while Coley was in there, was still doing the same thing that we planned coming in.
Michigan State jumped in front 7-0 early in the second quarter. Then a few minutes later, they extended their lead.
From the 36, it's a 46-yard boot. It's long enough. It's good!
I realized as a coach, 10-0 on the road without your running back, without your quarterback. I mean, yeah, those were factors. But what I preached was there's no circumstance that we can't overcome.
On the ensuing possession, the cleated Irish had a first down on the Spartan 34. A pair of backups brought the Irish back into the game.
We go to a new formation. My assignment's just clear out, tie up the safety, and take him deep. Boy, they didn't think much of me at all. 7-8 yards behind anybody. I just start waving right away, hoping Coley would see.
Deep is Gladio. Notre Dame.
After a scoreless third on the first play of the fourth quarter, the Irish grew even.
Here it is. It's good.
Later in the quarter, Notre Dame's Tom Shane picked off quarterback Jimmy Ray's pass and brought the ball deep into Spartan territory. However, Michigan State's defense stiffened and forced Notre Dame into a 41-yard field goal attempt.
It's up. No good.
From the sideline, I thought the ball had gone through the uprights, but it apparently had just missed to one side.
With 1:15 left, Michigan State was forced to punt, and Notre Dame, with a chance to win, got the ball back on their own 30-yard line.
Parsegian's got a decision to make. Do I try and pass the ball, risk an interception? They could have easily lost that game had Era tried to pass. So Era played it safe.
Seymour to the near side. And Coley O'Brien retains possession. And it looks like that's all. The final score, Michigan State 10, Notre Dame 10.
Parsegian's decision to run the clock out to preserve the tie would go down as one of the most controversial decisions in Notre Dame football history.
Era got blasted after the game. Jim Murray, the great columnist for the Los Angeles Times, wrote a column with the headline, "'Tis a pity when Notre Dame tries to tie one for the Gipper."
If you want to second-guess the decision, that's your business. I'd love to have seen the articles that were written if I make some dumb mistake, throwing the ball out in the flat, the kid intercepts it, they kick a field goal or score a touchdown, we get beaten the game. We won the national championship by winning the last ball game.
In Notre Dame's final game of the regular season, Coley O'Brien and the Irish left no doubt as to who was number one by thrashing arch-rival USC 51-0. However, the skeptics still remain.
There are still people, Notre Dame lovers and Notre Dame haters, who feel that Era Parsegian should have played for the win, that Notre Dame should always play for the win.
On Thanksgiving Day, 1971, unbeaten Nebraska and Oklahoma were vying for an Orange Bowl berth, a Big 8 title, and a shot at the national championship.
It just seemed like every day, all of the sports revolved around that game. The World Series, NBA, high school football, forget about it. Everything was so locked into OU Nebraska.
The Cornhuskers entered the game with a 29 consecutive game unbeaten streak. Their offense was led by quarterback Jerry Taggy, running back Jeff Kenny, and flanker Johnny Rogers, and averaged 35 points a game. The defense was even more imposing. Led by Larry Jacobson, Nebraska was giving up a mere 6 points per game. Led by quarterback Jack Mildred and tailback Greg Pruitt, the Sooners led the nation, averaging 45 points and an astounding 481 yards rushing per game.
If you put up a picture of a cowboy, that would be Jack Mildred. He was the Marlboro man. He was the perfect wishbone quarterback.
Our talent was great, but at the same time, it was the innovation of the triple option, the veer offense with the three-back principle, and it took a while for defenses to catch up with it.
Over 63,000 fans packed Owen Field in Oklahoma for this decade's game of the century. Over 5,400 of these fans were red-clad Nebraskans and got a chance to cheer first, just 3 minutes and 32 seconds into the game.
It's high in the air, which is what Wiley wanted to do, so there'd be tick coverage, and Rogers gets away. Look at that. Johnny Rogers. Look at the moves by that sensational player, a native of Omaha, and he is gone.
Nebraska jumped ahead 7-0.
I still, to this day, think that Johnny Rogers' punt return for a touchdown is one of the great plays that I've ever seen.
Trailing 14-10 in the second quarter, Oklahoma's offense got the ball back in their own territory.
Our goal was to go in there and not do something dumb and turn the ball over. And Johnny Harrison, my old high school teammate, comes running by and says, I can beat this guy deep. And so we run down the west side line, John does, and it makes a great over-the-shoulder catch with about 15 seconds to go. This is not Oklahoma's offense, but it was that day.
Mildred hooked up with Harrison again on the very next play.
1st and 10 with the clock running, and there is a touchdown, Oklahoma, John Harrison. This is the first time all year that Nebraska has been behind.
Harrison's score, with 5 seconds left in the half, gave the Sooners a 17-14 lead heading into the locker room. In the second half, Nebraska began pounding the Sooners with hard-nosed running back Jeff Kinney.
Kinney and Damsberger are the setbacks. Kinney going wild here in the second half.
Kinney led Nebraska to 2 consecutive touchdowns in the third quarter.
Kinney and Olds with the setback. Look at that move. Jeff Kinney pulling away from everyone for a 3-yard touchdown romp.
Nebraska led 28-17.
Further pressure has been put on Oklahoma as a result of another Jeff Kinney touchdown.
But Mildred led the Sooners back.
Touchdown, Jack Mildred.
Then with 7:10 left in the game, he found his old high school buddy Harrison on 4th and 6 from the Nebraska 16.
They need 6 yards. Mildred busting one out here to a man who's open. It's a touchdown, Oklahoma lead.
It seemed as though whoever had the ball last was going to win.
By the fourth quarter, our running game was in high gear, and our offensive line was really taking control. So I just kept giving the ball to Kenny. I did it over and over and over until they stopped it.
That's a good man to give it to when you need a yard or more. Look at that power runner, Jeff Kinney.
Down 31-28, Nebraska was confronted with a critical 3rd and 8 at the 46-yard line with 4:50 left.
Dropping back to pass, I got flushed out. There wasn't a whole lot of room in there to throw the ball, and the only thing I could do because of the zone was throw between 2 linebackers, and Johnny read that too.
Johnny Rogers caught the ball, and it's a Nebraska first down and a big one.
Then we just went right back to Kenny, and he just went nuts.
Not to be denied, Jeff Kinney. Nebraska has regained the lead.
Trailing 35-31, Oklahoma had one final chance, but faced a 4th and long with a little over a minute left to play.
And that clock continues to tick away. If they do not score, they'll not get the ball again. Game, Chris, has come down to 1 snap. The season has come down to 1 snap for both of these teams.
4th down and 14. Mildred looking. Mildred getting away. The ball knocked down by Rich Glover, number 79. Jacobson was the first in, and the Nebraska players are happy, and well, they should be.
1971 Oklahoma-Nebraska game is the greatest game ever played, pro or college. Dave Kindren at the time, was a writer for the Louisville Courier-Journal. His lead was, they can quit playing now. They played the perfect game.
In the early 20th century, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Penn were among the best teams in college football. But for a brief moment, tiny Center College in Danville, Kentucky, a school of just 300 students, charmed the nation.
The players at Center were a very religious bunch. In 1919, in a game against Powerhouse, West Virginia, they were losing 6-0 at half. They knelt down on the field and prayed. They were so inspired when they came back onto the field, they were actually in tears. They rallied to beat the Mountaineers, and from that point on, they became known as the Praying Colonels.
Robert Chief Myers, a Center graduate, coached high school football in Fort Worth, Texas in the 1910s.
He wanted his old school to have a great football program. So he talked to a bunch of his high school players and said he wished that he could see them playing for Center someday. Well, sure enough, the head coaching job at Center came open.
Myers arrived with his core of loyal Texans. Among those high school standouts was quarterback Bo McMillan.
He really believed in training. In fact, when one guy got caught smoking, Bo said, either he goes or I go. So the coach kicked the smoker off the team.
Center finished the 1919 season undefeated, and people up north took notice.
Howard Reynolds, the sports editor of the Boston Post, made Center famous in New England by running headlines like, "The Mysterious Team of 1919. He and Eddie Mahan, a former Harvard captain, went down to Kentucky to scout the Praying Colonels.
With their Cambridge visitors on hand, Center dismantled Georgetown 77-0. They were invited to play at Harvard the following season. The Crimson lost just 4 games in 10 years. New England fans were in awe of the small school from Kentucky. Throughout the game, half of the stadium was cheering and rooting for the Praying Colonels.
The people up in Boston were kind of intrigued by the guys from Center. They saw them as country innocents, and they were fascinated by them.
They had given Harvard a good game in 1920. They were ahead 14-7, but Harvard was bigger and a lot more guys.
After the game, the Harvard captain went over to Bo McMillan and said, "We'll give you the game ball." And McMillan said, "No, we don't want it this year. We're coming back next year, and we want to win it on our own."
Center spent the summer dedicating themselves for a rematch with Harvard the following season. In 1921, both teams entered the game undefeated, and the Crimson were rated a 3-1 favorite. 1 minute into the third quarter of a scoreless game, Center received a break. After a poor Harvard punt and a penalty, the Praying Colonels had the ball on the Crimson 32-yard line. It was time for Bo McMillan to make his mark.
McMillan cut off right tackle, then slashed across the field the opposite direction, a kind of planned play, leaving the secondary flat-footed. At the 10-yard line, he tripped over his own shoelace and actually stumbled into the end zone.
McMillan's spectacular run was the only score. Center held on to win 6-0, ending Harvard's unbeaten streak at 25. Danville, Kentucky was chaotic. C6H0 was painted all over town. The Center players piled into a fire engine and were paraded throughout the town.
When I went back to Danville, Kentucky, the Center team, all hell broke loose.
After the season, Bo McMillan departed, and Center could no longer compete with the nation's elite teams.
Well, they just went back to being what they were. A little school like that can't compete with the big schools on a sustained basis.
But for one afternoon in 1921, tiny Center College proved that at least for one day, anything is possible.